Hello, hello. Just a couple housekeeping bits before we begin. Um, just wanted to check and see whether everything was working and all the audio and everything was uh, on a good level here. Um, First time doing any of this, so it's not like it's going to be 100% professional here. Sometimes we got to fail and fail fast. So, um, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Uh, yeah, we can hear you. You can hear me great. Amazing. So the audio filters and the microphone is doing well. Great. Okay. So thank you so much, Kaylee. Appreciate you. So, got, let's see here. Please excuse me. Okay. So in 4 minutes, I'm going to start recording the audiobook version of the Cherale. Um, Before we begin, I'm definitely not going to get through the entire thing today. So that is not going to happen. But I am happy to see that this is moving forward. Just want to make sure that you can actually see me. I wonder whether you can actually see my face right now or whether you can see an image. Hmm. Yeah, you see my face, but from the side. Okay, awesome. I thought so. I just was like, I I've got two panels here. Oh, Charlotte, good to see you here as well. Thank you. Um, I know it's a side profile shot. It's kind of hard to get everything set up for it perfectly, but I'm just kind of going by the seat of my pants here. So, um, yeah, coming closer to the actual recording of it. Um, God, this is a little exciting, but also a little bit like a little bit nervous. Yeah, I actually am. Can you imagine? Yeah. Well, this is great though. I'm just gonna wave to everyone. There you go. Um, so I'm gonna be ambitious and try and tag and demonstrate and show off a product. Uh, so I'm gonna try and link the product here for the paperback, the signed paperback. Um, yeah, it didn't. It didn't work. Okay. All right. Uh, Dismissing that. Yeah, forget all that. Okay. Yeah, I thought that was maybe a little bit too ambitious. All right. Uh, but it can be seen. Sorry, it can be purchased on our store, V13.store. It's actually now available everywhere. So that's something that I did very recently. I published it on um, a platform called Ingram Spark. And what it does is that it distributes everywhere. So that is 46,000 different retailers. Um, that includes Amazon and all of their channels, obviously, but it also includes things like the Barnes and Noble, online and physical spaces, as well as libraries, universities, booksellers. So it is available. Now, in terms of whether it'll be on shelves, no, it's not right away. You can order it through any bookseller now. I always encourage everyone to support your local bookseller. Um, I know that I'm using a very big, crazy, large platform, second largest search engine in the world. Uh, I've also got this shirt that I designed. You can have it if you want. After this stream is done, I'm going to make it live in our store on v13.store. Uh, that store I helped create, by the way, a couple Halloweens ago. And yeah, it's been one hell of a learning experience. So, anyway, without further ado, I'm going to start recording the audiobook itself. And thank you for being here with me. V13 Press presents The Cherale by Lance Marwood, read by the author. Published by V13 Press, 2025. Dedication. For Blueberry, Lori, and Henny. Epigraph. There is nothing given by spirits that is not taken back thrice over, for their contracts bind both flesh and spirit, and their gifts are laden with ruin. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, De Occulta Philosophia, 1533. Chapter 1. Michael Abney was trying to write when the shrieking started. The violent outburst startled him, the breath catching in his throat for a panic moment, as the otherworldly harshness of the cries pierced his heart. Then they became all too familiar, the discordant feedback resolving itself into human ululations. It was his son, Gordon. Michael exhaled. He reached for the monitor, the video feed sputtering to life as the shrieking intensified. This puzzled him. His 2-year-old was supposed to nap another 40 minutes. What's more, he didn't usually rouse with such fury. Michael kissed his teeth. Brilliant, he thought. Never any time for this, he began to rage internally. He'd been trying to construct a sentence for his next novel for what had turned out to be far longer than Michael was used to committing to such a granular task. Yet it had felt like a Sisyphean effort. He tried to use the rush of adrenaline to bang out the rest of the thought, but to his dismay, he suddenly found he didn't have the words at all. Cursing under his breath, Michael got up in disgust, indignation rising with his son's cries. He opened the door to his son's nursery. It had been pitch black, but the light from the hallway bowled into the nursery, sparkling off tear-soaked cheeks. "Hey, buddy, what's going on?" Michael offered in what he thought was a soothing tone. "Why so upset, huh?" He turned the light on. The room's lamp mimicked a sunrise in the tomb-like darkness of the nursery. The shadows retreated in the wake of the dawning light, but something caught Michael's eye, and for the second time his breath caught in his throat. One part of the shadows didn't retreat. An outline of a figure remained in the darkness. It wasn't an outline of a person, not in the traditional sense. There were humanoid features, certainly, but there was something else about the shroud around it that didn't add up. And just as quickly it disappeared. Gordon stopped crying. He was looking into Michael's eyes. Michael realized he was panicked, adrenaline pounding in his veins. He smiled and laughed. "It's just my imagination, fella. I haven't slept well in a while," he added. It was true. Ever since the birth of their son, neither Michael nor his wife Rose had been able to get a decent night's sleep. While they had consulted a sleep coach, read a wide berth of literature on the topic, and invested in every kind of sleep accessory they could, it had been the one part of raising a child that had dragged on them. Rather than reassure him, Michael's laughter about the situation only seemed to upset Gordon all over again. His face crumpled from a stern interest into wailing distress. Michael bit the inside of his lower lip. He could feel the shelf where he had been doing this for the past year and a half. Whenever he had been forced to dig deep and resist lashing out, any time he'd had to curb his anger, any time he'd been about to explode with a gathering rage, he'd clamped down on that part of himself. He would not repeat the same upbringing he'd always told himself. And so he'd ball up his fists, bite the inside of his lip, tauten his jaw, and inhale a sharp breath, and then let go of it all. The resulting relaxation it gave was usually enough to send waves of calm throughout him, ending up as goosebumps on his flesh. But this time, it didn't work. There were no waves of relaxation, no physical or mental reset, no goosebumps of pleasure. There was just the same adrenaline pumping through him, the same taut, rigid muscles, the same anger. It was an unwelcome wrinkle in his arsenal of self-care. It was especially unwelcome at this moment because Gordon was supposed to sleep for another 42 minutes, but more importantly, Michael was supposed to be writing. It had been a hard 6 years. In his 30s now, Michael had spent the majority of his time trying to make it into film and television. By the time he met Rose, he'd come to the realization that it wasn't directing or even acting he was after. Instead, it was writing. But despite the years of opportunity Michael had spent at waiting tables and serving drinks, many drinks ended up in his own hands after his shifts. And so that went on for years, despite the fact he was enrolled and then had taken a year off and then re-enrolled and then finally completed his degree. In the meantime, Rose had risen to prominence in her field. An investment banker, she'd also started a financial advice blog, which led to her becoming a contributor to a reputable financial newsletter. While her star was steadily rising, Michael's was nowhere to be seen. The success had meant they could afford for Michael to be a full-time father, allowing him the chance to write, Rose to work and provide, and for Gordon to have either one of his parents with him at all times, and not some stranger, as Rose had helpfully put it. She supported Michael's writing, had always done so, even through his Bukowski phase, which Michael could only remember now through gritted teeth. Drunk and petulant, he'd skived off for his year off, the one he was supposed to be using for self-development and to save up for the year ahead. Instead, he'd squandered it, and he'd had to take on more student debt, which had meant they had to give up the chance of buying a home. Michael was thinking about this, trying to comfort his screaming son, when Rose walked in through the front door. "What happened?" she asked. Michael furrowed his brow. "He just started screaming. I don't know why," he started explaining. Rose had already by this point offered the boy her breast, and he had finally stopped and was suckling greedily. Something about the sight of him calming to her presence and bosom and Michael's inability to provide these basics layered on top of the seething he was feeling. Before he could continue to explain, Rose asked, "What temperature is his room?" Michael gritted his teeth. 74, he said. "Oh, 74 is too warm. I would put it at 73, she said, not unkindly. But by this point, Michael's fists were balled up, and even when he released them, he could still feel the residual heat that wouldn't dissipate. "Great, thanks. Thank God you got here," he said, striding towards the kitchen. Rose looked at him, confusion written all over her face. "I wasn't trying to criticize," she began. Michael grabbed a beer from the fridge. He reached into the drawer and pulled out an old bottle opener, and in a fluid motion uncapped the bottle of lager. "She makes it seem effortless," he said. It was a line from a critic's review of one of her columns. She had been so happy when she'd read the review. It had come at a perfect time. The blog had seized, and she'd just started contributing her own section of the newsletter, and everyone was waiting to see if she could stick the landing. The reviews had mostly been positive, but the one Michael was quoting had been effusive, bordering on the comical. Rose's face reddened, and she scowled. "Thanks for this. Love to come home not to one but 2 fucking children. Brilliant end to my day," she said. Michael felt strange. Normally he would already be apologizing and backing down, but today something felt odd. He was aware that he was tired and lonely and in need of a beverage, but there was something else. "Have you had a long day? I'm sorry to hear that. No wonder you haven't asked about mine. It's been so hard for you," he shot back. Rose just blinked, unable to comprehend the indignation that she was being confronted with. The babe delatched and leaned forward to get down to the floor. She put him on the floor and he started wandering off toward the screen door. He started banging on the window while Rose and Michael had to stare down. The moment was broken up, mercifully, Michael thought, by the ringing of Rose's phone. Michael looked for Gordon. He found him in the living room, this time biting his fist, standing with his shoulders up to his ears, looking at the far corner of the room. Michael felt the hairs on his neck stand up when he rounded on him. Gordon's eyeline was dead set on something, not just staring off. Michael looked back and forth and felt a powerful urge to scream, but not with rage. Instead, he felt the need to shriek from the sudden, bewildering strangeness that had suddenly taken over his son, himself, his life. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. I'm just going to take real quick breaks to drink a little bit of water, maybe answer any questions if people have any. In between, I want to make sure that the audio integrity is good. I'm just kind of like recording, making note of like little F-ups that I do in the recording so that I can like go back and fix it later. There's every chance that I might have to do everything again. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Big shout out to everyone who's actually like here. I really appreciate it. Yeah, no, one long recording is it's a bit much. I've also got my cat in here with me and my chair is super loud, so I have to be like really sat like still doing this. And also I have a hard stop at 12 because I have a meeting with just some other possible business opportunities as always. So there's a lot of discovery calls in this line of everything. So, but yeah, God, I'm like Reader's Digest with how I talk. It says continued on page whatever, but I just kind of like read through the stuff in the interim. Okay, so I'm going to jump into chapter 2, but if anyone has any particular questions, just a little aside, I think I'll just like, I know that I'm not going to get through this whole thing, so there's just no chance. It's chapter 2 and it's already 11:12, so not going to happen. But yeah, it goes without saying that reading that back, that first chapter, it's it's so funny how much of that is just me reporting life at the time. I was just this the only I wrote this back in August 2022, and it was like just the only way that I could sort of process all of the ineffectual feelings around parenting. You know, add to that I had a wife working a pandemic and a kid who is nonverbal. It's been a thing. I need to quiet that down. That was crazy. I think that I'm not connected here. I'm going to start chapter 2 in just a second. Just need to make sure that I connect. Okay. Okay, let's jump in. Chapter 2. The strangeness of Gordon's behavior only intensified. The tension between Michael and Rose only ramped up, to the point they were operating in utterly separate spheres. The spare bedroom that usually only operated as an interim crashing pad for visiting relatives became his primary residence. The separation between him and Rose started to impact his sleep, and there were telltale signs that it was dragging on her as well. Worst affected, though, was Gordon himself. While he had said some words in the past sporadically, these days he didn't have any utterances whatsoever. The first words he'd come to use, such as dada and milk and more, had evaporated. In their wake was the crying. His screams at night were now a constant. After months of training to finally get him to sleep through the night, now it was as though they were right back at the beginning. Except now the nights were far worse. Michael was on the phone with his mother, Sherry. They hadn't spoken much since his grandfather David's passing, but as they talked, they realized something unsettling. Gordon's sudden regression had begun on the very same day that David had died. "I just don't understand it," he said. "He's been great for the past year. We've had 0 issues since we went into sleep training with him." "Maybe it's the training that did this," she said. Michael bit the inside of his bottom lip again. He could feel the shelf protruding when he wasn't actively biting it now. "And what makes you say that?" he asked in a dangerous tone. He wasn't about to have any more judgment from her on this topic. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she said. Michael laughed, bitterness frothing in his throat. "Hard not to, when I've got a toddler who seems to be regressing by the day," he said. "And what does Rose think about this?" Sherry asked. "She," he began, when he heard the rasp of the monitor. He clicked the button, the video feed coming into view. Gordon was mercifully asleep. "Sorry," he said, distracted. "It's okay," his mother said. The care and concern in her voice was enough to soften Michael's exasperation. She was, for all intents and purposes, his mother, and she was concerned for him and his son's well-being. "There's something else," he started. "You've seen something," she said. Michael's heart skipped a beat. "How did you know that?" he asked, bewildered that her guess had hit the mark. She shrugged on the video call. "I used to see things every now and then. I still do," she said. The way she spoke, she may as well have been talking about a meal or television episode for all the casualness she said it. "But those were just ghost stories, right?" Michael asked. "Yes, but they were true, Michael," she said. "Oh, come on, Mum," he said, instantly exasperated. "When your father told me about living in India," she began. Michael sighed inwardly. Everything always came back to his father and his upbringing in India. Raised there as a young boy, he moved with his family when he was in his teens to North America, moving around until they had settled in Hamilton, Ontario. He used to tell me about his own father's experiences, and let me tell you, in a country as old as India, it's no small thing to see apparitions. "Great-Grandpa Stephen, I know," he said. "You know as much as he told you, and that was only so much," her voice soft now. "What do you mean?" he asked. There was a silence. "I mean, I told your dad not to tell you the stories about him that had to do with his family messing around with all that black magic stuff," she said. Michael's eyes furrowed into a deep frown. "What black magic? What are you talking about?" he asked. Sherry lit a cigarette, her face contemplative. With her phone propped against something to free her hands, Michael watched her every movement. Fingers hooking the cigarette from its pack, plucking a match from its book, the brief sputter of flame that danced to life before she extinguished it with a practiced flick of her wrist. Exhaling smoke, she continued. "I mean, when he was a boy, he saw something he shouldn't have," she began. Michael sat motionless, his breath gone. The smoke from his mother's lips shaped ghosts in the air. Great-grandfather Stephen, grandfather David, his father Joseph, the Abney men and their burden. Whew. Okay. Chapter 2. Down. I'm going to take another water break here for just a second. This next one's a doozy. I mean, it's a long one. It's also, a lot of it is what I had written before the majority of this. I was actually trying to capture the stories that me and my brother and sisters had been told when we were young. I've taken crazy artistic license with some of it, but the bones of it are pretty much there. So, yeah. Whew. Okay. So let's move right into the next one. If anyone has any questions, by all means, shoot them. Otherwise, we will just continue on to the next chapter. All right, tight. Let's go. Chapter 3. When Stephen was very young, living in Bangalore, he lived in a house with several helpers and cleaners. Among these was an elderly man named Kalidasa who worked as a sweeper. One day, Stephen saw the sweep unravel a bird of paradise from thin air. It was the most shocking and beautiful thing he had seen, and it pleased him to no end. When Stephen begged to learn the secret, Kalidasa refused at first, studying the boy carefully. "This knowledge is not given lightly," he said, his dark eyes studying Stephen. Their conversations were always in Hindi, the language that everyone around him defaulted to outside of English, whether at home, in the streets, at school, or among the household staff who had raised him. But what truly changed Kalidasa's mind came 3 days later. The sweeper was ill with fever, confined to his small quarters behind the kitchen. The household doctor had come and gone, declaring it merely a passing ailment that required rest, leaving only basic remedies. But Stephen, who had recently recovered from a similar fever, recognized something the doctor had missed. The same yellow tinge to the eyes that had prompted his own mother to send for a specialist from Mysore. It was Stephen who came to Kalidasa's quarters, bringing a particular herbal tincture his specialist had prescribed. Rare and expensive, saved from his own treatment. "Why?" Kalidasa had asked, voice weak from his sickness. "Because the doctor's wrong. You need this medicine," Stephen replied, with a child's certainty. "I can tell." Sure enough, Kalidasa recovered in short order. After this transpired, he watched Stephen more closely. The boy possessed something rare, an ability to see beyond the boundaries others accepted without question. When a servant was blamed for breaking a vase, the boy spoke up despite knowing he might be scolded for contradicting adults. When an injured street dog appeared at the garden gate, Stephen secretly fed it until it healed, even though his father had ordered it shooed away. "You have the sight," Kalidasa told him one evening as they sat in the garden, the boy helping him sort seeds. "You see what is hidden. You question what others accept." He looked at Stephen with new purpose. "My knowledge is dying with me. The British have hunted my kind, those who keep the old ways. I had a son once who would have carried on, but the cholera took him 5 summers ago." Kalidasa explained that he was a keeper of ancient knowledge, one of the few remaining practitioners of a tradition that had predated the British arrival by centuries. "I made a pact with the devas that dwell beyond our reality," he told Stephen. "But such power should not die, it must continue. Even if," he said, his eyes fixed on the pale child's face in front of him, "through unexpected vessels." If Stephen wished to learn, Kalidasa explained, he would need to undergo a ritual. Stephen, not knowing much of his family's Christian orthodoxy, but deeply drawn to Kalidasa's world, agreed eagerly. On the next full moon, Kalidasa and Stephen went out to an old graveyard beyond the city walls. Kalidasa prepared a space by a large tree near the center of the graveyard, lighting candles and murmuring incantations in a language Stephen didn't recognize. When he was ready, he told the boy he would need to climb to the top of the tree. He could not let go, otherwise he would fail. It wasn't clear what failure meant, but even to young Stephen, it wasn't good. Then Kalidasa's voice deepened as he recited in Sanskrit before translating. "Those who worship the terrible, who delight in the fearsome, who dwell in darkness, they go to the realm of blind shadows. Death follows them like a shadow, unseen until it devours." He fixed his eyes on Stephen. "The devas will test you with terrors beyond your understanding. Those who falter are lost between worlds. Are you sure you wish to continue?" Michael's great-grandfather Stephen nodded yes. He was 7. And so, under the light of the pale moon, in the middle of that burial ground, he started climbing the tree. A gust of wind howled out of the forests and struck the boy with sudden force. Stephen had spent his childhood exploring the jungles of India, swinging from vines and scaling banyan trees. His small hands found purchase where others might have slipped. The wind intensified, coming from nowhere yet everywhere, but he held fast. Stephen climbed higher up the dead tree. Its surface felt like aged bone beneath his fingers, slick with petrified bark beaten smooth by years of sun. As he reached the middle branches, the wind transformed. Voices now. Howling, screaming, voices. They began distant, but soon pushed their way into his ears. Unearthly, horrifying screams. Inhuman. Demonic. Most sounded like obscenities in languages he didn't recognize, but some he understood perfectly. They threatened him. They threatened his family. Even now, no one knows the actual words the voices spoke. Even now, no one knows the actual words the voices spoke. But every telling of the tale, passed down through generations, agrees on one thing. These were hideous threats that would break any normal person. Stephen wanted to cover his ears. He wanted to clamp his hands against his head and shut out the shrieks. Instead, he kept climbing. Halfway there now. He almost fell when the threats became physical. Terrible raking claws tore across his face and back and arms. To anyone watching, there was nothing there, only moonlight on a tree, a man and a boy, candles flickering below. Yet bloody claw marks appeared on Stephen's flesh all the same. Blood seeped through his shirt. To his horror, he watched claw marks materialize on his arms, hands, and wrists, felt them score his thighs and back. They scratched at his eyes. He cried out but did not let go. Stephen kept climbing. The shrieks and clawing continued, but something inside him hardened. He reached the top branch of the tree at last. Something dark and colossal moved in front of the moon. A shadow, a shape fell over his sight. The earth below shrank as the sky expanded. Things lost their proportion. To hear it the way your father told it, Sherry said. They often glossed over this part, unsure of what Stephen meant. But your father had a pretty good idea of what it may have looked like. When the other realm comes close to you, things in the distance become more distant, and the horror emerges bigger and more bold than everything else. I know this, she said as she turned the cigarette pack over and over in her hands, because your father saw it happen when his own demon manifested, a pitch face with white, unseeing eyes dripping blood from their mouth. What are you talking about? Michael asked. He glanced at the video monitor, reassuring himself that the boy still slept. Sherry lit another cigarette, a forlorn look on her face as she recalled the past. Your father was a good man. He had to see a lot in his job. He was always trying to help others, and in the end it was a drunk driver that killed him. But during his life, he saw unbelievable things, she said. Paramedics often do, Michael said, his sarcasm returning. Not like this, Sherry said, not taking the bait. She thumbed the butt of her cigarette, spraying the ashes into the tray. It was at this point Michael noticed her hand was shaking. Mom, are you okay? He managed to ask. She nodded, swallowing. I just haven't thought about this stuff in a long time, she said. Anyway, your father saw all sorts of things, and one of those things was what we can only assume was some sort of apparition. He'd gotten the call. This was in the months leading up to his death. At the time, though, it was all so routine and he had his whole life ahead of him. He took the call, him and his partner arriving a little after 1 a.m. over by Pine and Berry. It was a black sedan. Forget the make, but your father was running points, so he approached the driver's side. The car was wrapped around a pole, smoke rolling out of the hood. Only the driver was in there. But when your father went to open the door, your father saw this person, though it wasn't a person anymore. It was a... She hesitated around the word. After some consideration, though, she finished. Something like a demon. White face, eyes like the void you find inside a black hole, mouth agape with blood. There was gray matter in his hair. The guy shouldn't have even been alive, but your father swore until his dying day that that thing was staring straight at him and said something to him. What did it say? Asked Michael. I don't know, Sherry said, exhaling smoke. Your father never told me, though he said he'd tell me someday. Stubborn as anything. Michael considered this. He realized she'd never finished the story about his great-grandfather. So what happened to Stephen? He asked. I imagine Stephen saw his own version of this, she said. When Stephen grabbed the top part of the branch, immediately the howling and clawing stopped. He clung to the branch, panting, near tears, holding on for dear life. It was never made clear whether Stephen Abney communed with the spirit or how long he remained at the top, but it was implied that some period of time passed. "I imagine it might have been like a dream," said Sherry, "where real time slows to a crawl and we can live out hours or days when only seconds have passed in waking life." When Stephen made it to the ground, he came down with knowledge beyond his years. To hear the way his family told it, he was wiser, almost wizened from the experience, an old man in a child's body. Kalidasa had declared incantations over Stephen's flesh, and the claw marks disappeared, blood flow ceasing and skin coming back together with nothing more than suggestions of scars. The experience changed Stephen. He could now do things with the power of thought, with a deeper understanding of the world around him. His parents didn't take long to notice their previously sweet, precocious son had transformed overnight into nothing short of a warlock in the armor of a child. It took even less time to find out what had happened. Horrified, Stephen's parents banished Kalidasa from their household. "He was never seen again from what I gather," she said. Michael was speechless. He'd heard some stories as a kid. His grandfather used to tell one particular story about Stephen walking David through a garden. David, Michael's grandfather and Stephen's son, spotted a beautiful bird. Stephen saw David looking at it and asked if he wanted to see it up close. "Yes, of course," David had replied, eyes bulging with excitement. Stephen brought his lips together and produced this peculiar two-tone whistle, a high, clear note followed by a softer, lower one. As if it was an old, trained pet, the bird flew down to him and landed on his arm. David didn't move, stunned by both the bird's obedience and the strange, piercing quality of his father's call, but Stephen just told him to go ahead and touch it. After a brief moment of hesitation, he did. Michael mentioned this story to Sherry. She nodded, reminiscing about the stories her late husband had told her. "That was the lighter side of things," she said. There was one time in Calcutta when Stephen was walking David through town. A fakir worked the street, doing magic tricks and charming a cobra from its basket with a flute like in the movies, collecting money from onlookers. From the way Sherry's husband had told it, Stephen started making fun of the fakir after watching his children stare in amazement at the act. Maybe jealousy seeing his kids amazed by what he considered parlor tricks. Or perhaps he thought the man was just an illusionist with some nascent hypnotic skills. Either way, Stephen thought little of the man and made it known. Soon the crowd started laughing. The fakir grew tired of this, decided he'd had enough of this well-dressed white man making fun of him. With emotion and a word on his lips, the fakir locked eyes with Stephen. Suddenly, half of Stephen's face and body sagged, gripped with a paralysis that was alarmingly physical. Stephen looked shocked. He realized he was in a dangerous situation with a real sorcerer, with skill at what he was doing. The fakir, eyes still locked on Michael's great-grandfather, lifted his flute to his lips and began playing an unearthly tune. At first, nothing noticeable happened. Stephen stood stock still, trying to move. The crowd wondered what was happening. Then they noticed a swarm of flies descending on Stephen, covering him, trying to fly into his eyes, ears, mouth, into his body. The fakir was cocksure, smiling, daring the man to respond. Perhaps it was anger at being taken by surprise, or the fact that fakir would attempt such a hideous torment on him. Perhaps it was anger at being taken by surprise, or the fact the fakir would attempt such a hideous torment on him. But all I know from what your father told me, the one thing that remains constant, is that your great-grandfather got angry, Sherry said. Stephen suddenly snarled a word from the part of his throat that still worked, lifting his free hand in sync with this curse. The fakir's flute flew into his own throat, the music squealing into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flies dissipated. The crowd began to panic. Stephen's face took on its regular aspect again. With a look of fury, he tightened the grip in his hand, shaking with an unseen exertion. The flute kept driving into the fakir's throat until the man's choking coughs began producing blood. He spasmed as blood flew from around the flute in his mouth and throat, spewing from his nose and lips in a torrent, his eyes still locked on Stephen. In their horror, David screamed at his father to stop. For a brief, hideous second, Stephen seemed to ignore him. Then, just as suddenly, he stopped. The blood, flute, phlegm, and mucus came out of the fakir in a torrent. Both men panted as though running a marathon. A ghastly silence settled over the crowd. The cobra slowly made its way out of the basket. Stephen fixed it with a stare. The thing stopped, transfixed. "Don't come back here again or I'll kill you," Stephen finally said. And just like that, he walked away. "I don't understand," said Michael. "If Dad knew about all this, why didn't Gramps tell me?" "Because I wouldn't let him," Sherry said. A finality had crept into her voice that brooked no resistance. "I wasn't about to let him fill your head with all that shit." "So you do think it's all bullshit," Michael said, slightly comforted by the notion that these stories were just that, stories. But Sherry shook her head. "I just didn't want to believe," Sherry said, her voice dropping. "Your father was an amazing person, but he had his dark side. All of the Abneys did. She corrected herself. Even you," she added, looking into her son's eyes with a weight that made Michael's skin crawl. Michael bristled. "Okay, but what does that have to do with demons and snake charmers and haunted trees?" Sherry ashed her cigarette, her hand trembling slightly. "You remember all the times I used to smudge our home?" she asked. Michael was taken aback by the memory. She used to burn sage, moving from room to room, mumbling prayers and incantations that seemed to hover between protection and exorcism. He nodded. "That was because of David," she said, and something in her tone made Michael lean forward. "After Stephen died, your grandfather became obsessed. Not just curious, obsessed. He collected everything, old letters, fragments of stories, photographs with edges worn smooth. He was trying to map something impossible." She took a long drag of her cigarette, her eyes distant. He would spend entire nights surrounded by documents, creating these elaborate diagrams. Family trees annotated with dates, moments of creative blockage, instances of unexplained silence. He was trying to understand the pattern. Michael frowned. Grandpa David was always cryptic. He was always making promises that never materialized. Sherry's expression softened, but with an edge of remembered pain. "That's not fair. David was carrying a burden none of us could understand. He'd seen things, heard things, that changed how he understood the world. Your father told me how he'd find David awake at all hours, staring at windows, listening for something that existed just beyond human hearing. The Abney men have always struggled to find the right words," she continued. David would start sentences and trail off as if something was physically preventing him from speaking. He wrote constantly. Journals, fragments, equations that made no sense to anyone else. But he'd burn most of what he wrote, terrified that the words themselves might be dangerous. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Once I found him in his study. He was muttering about borders. The borders are thinner than anyone understands. When I asked what he meant, he just smiled. Not a happy smile, more like a wound." Michael's throat tightened. He recognized that feeling. The frustration of thoughts that dissolved when spoken, the clarity that only came through writing. Another inheritance he'd never questioned until now. He shook his head. An hour ago, the world made sense. Now everything felt like a fragile membrane about to tear. "You said you used to see things. What did you see?" Michael demanded, his voice barely a whisper. Sherry's eyes met his, and for the first time, Michael saw something beyond grief. Something that looked remarkably like fear. She looked off, struggling with the words. "It was pitch black. It was the kind of darkness that's a shadow in the night. I found it above your bed the night your father died when I came to get you. Ever since then, I've been trying to remove it from our home. It's the reason why we moved." "Is that why you moved out there? To get away from it?" Michael asked. "Partly. After your father died, I started seeing things more often. People thought I was losing my mind." She took a long drag. "Up here, nobody bothers me about it. I can come and go for months, and there's no one to notice or care. Just how I like it." "But what if something happened to you?" Sherry laughed bitterly. "That's the point, Michael. Who would know? Who would come looking? The few friends I had left stopped calling years ago." Another pause. "We Abneys tend to end up alone. It's safer that way." Michael heard something. A rasping, high-pitched squeal, followed by a lower one. He looked at the video monitor. The video feed came online, but the darkness around his son was arranged in the shape of a figure. A figure with eyes of void-like darkness. Michael let out an involuntary, guttural yelp, tripping on his way to his son's room. He went to open the door, but as he tried, something held it so that it was only slightly ajar. It was powerful, whatever it was, because it managed to keep all 200 pounds of Michael at bay without a hint of weakness. Through the opening, Michael saw his son standing in his bed, screaming, without any sound reaching him. Man. Oof. That was the long one. Hello, everyone in the chat and watching this right now. Good to see you. Again, really happy and grateful for all of you being here. Oh, thank you. I'm going to pin that shit right there. Spooky as hell. Hell yeah, dude. Getting ready for spooky season soon, you guys. It's only a few more months. Yeah, bit of trivia for you so I can like stretch, because I find myself like really I gotta like not move around because this chair is kind of whines and creaks a little bit, so I want to be careful about the recording here. This is a dynamic mic, and I've got like a limiter and a noise suppression on, but I've also got my loud ass cat in here that just loves to like snore randomly and loudly. So I'll be like on a work call and he'll just suddenly be like, be like, okay, it's fine. It's just my cat. Thank you. Whew. Just to be clear, like all of those stories were stories I grew up with, by the way. The only fabrication in and among all that was that there was I don't know if you heard that, but my cat just sneezed. Anyway, yeah, the only fabrication in that was that I gave the sweep a name. In all the stories I was told, the sweep that sort of did that ritual with my great-grandfather, his name Eric Founds. I'm actually named after him, Lance Eric Patrick Marwood. He was the one that was initiated into something. We don't know what, etc. I kind of felt like it was a bit kind of crummy that there's no mention or personality or humanization whatsoever of any person who's an actual like native Indian in the story, and it just kind of stood out to me, so I gave it something akin to, I don't know, a little bit more depth. You don't want just like a two-dimensional character. I tried to give it a little bit of something, but everything else, that's what I grew up with. The initiation of him going up the tree and things howling and scratching at him, that was real. Or at least real in the sense that that's the story I was told. If you want my thoughts on whether I think that's real, personally, I struggle with that. I don't think that it's real. I think that you get anyone out into the middle of a fucking graveyard in the dead of night, that's spooky enough, bruh. So, the Fakir duel, that was a story I grew up with as well. The bird of paradise just being created out of thin air, or summoning random wild birds, that was also another one that I grew up with. The one I will say was different, but is real, is actually the tale of Michael's dad. Boston's asking, how will you write a curse into your will? Just leave like a little signed version of this paperback. It's in the blood. No, the paramedic story of him coming up to that sedan is loosely based on my own experience. It's a bit heavy, so it was. But I'd seen a shooting take place. This is back like 10 years ago. So yeah, I can talk about it now because it's like I've been around the houses with dealing with that. But yeah, that was what that was inspired by. Anyway, it is true that my mom does love to smudge a fair bit. She's got her own like Costco-sized supply of sage tucked away somewhere. So I am going to read this next chapter, and then that will be the last one for the day. It's not too long, I don't think, so I won't run over. But it's a gross one. So reader or viewer or listener beware. This one's going to be a little bit. This is where a little bit of the body horror comes in. Chapter 4. Michael came to in a hospital bed. More accurately, Michael had been coming to over the course of several hours. Wakefulness came in waves, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, the hideous ache from a wound in his skull pulsating throughout him, turning his fevered dreams into torture rack sequences, an ice pick being slowly driven into his head. The familiar antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner mingled with the perfunctory detergent on stiff bed sheets. Around him, the general hubbub of people milling about and the persistent beeping of monitors made it both impossible to fully rest or be alert. A purgatory of the senses kept him suspended between full awareness and the comfort of unconsciousness. By the time he finally approached what could be called full consciousness, he was barely registering where he was, let alone who was with him. His eyes struggled to focus in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Rose was noticeably absent. So too was Gordon. As his vision cleared, he became aware of a presence beside his bed. Devon Marlowe, his therapist of 8 years, the man who had guided him through the darkest, most mournful bouts of depression and night terrors that had once threatened to consume him entirely, sat watching him. "Hello, Michael," Devon said. Concern, almost paternal in its expression, the same concern that had been Michael's lifeline all these years, bunched his thick gray eyebrows. Michael tried to speak, but felt his mouth dry as sand. A faint tickle at the back of his throat made him wince. Devon noticed immediately and offered him water from a styrofoam cup on his bedside tray. "Take it slow," he said, gently, supporting Michael's head with unexpected tenderness for a man of his profession. He gulped the water greedily. As he did, the soreness of his head screamed into life. The water caught on something in his throat, intensifying the tickle into an irritating scratch. He touched his hand to his head and withdrew it at the shock of feeling shaved, rough skin where hair should have been around the crown of his head. "What happened?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The words felt wrong in his mouth. He ran his tongue across his teeth, feeling something like strings caught between them, similar to after eating tough steak. He tasted copper, a familiar taste, but something else, something he thought he should recognize. "I think maybe don't try to talk much just yet," Devon suggested, his tone warm but tinged with professional caution. A faint antiseptic smell hung in the air between them. Michael tried to clear his throat, wincing at the sudden sharp pain. Devon leaned forward, the plastic chair creaking beneath him. "Your wife found you standing in the corner of your son's room. He was screaming, but you didn't move. Do you remember any of that, Michael?" he asked. Michael's eyes darted back and forth as fragments of memory surfaced. Michael's eyes darted back and forth as fragments of memory refused to surface. Devon's words hung between them, his shoulders squared. Michael swallowed painfully, the tickle in his throat transforming into something more solid, more disturbing. "The hospital called me when they couldn't reach Rose," Devon said quietly. "You found my card in your wallet. 8 years of therapy earns me an emergency contact status, I suppose, he offered with a wry smile. Michael sank back against the pillows, his hand unconsciously moving toward the bandages wrapped around his head. Devon caught the gesture and gently intercepted his fingers, guiding them back to the bed. The irritation in Michael's throat worsened, and he coughed lightly, immediately regretting it as pain shot through his skull. The coppery taste in his mouth intensified. Everyone's noticed changes this week. Devon's voice had hardened, professional concern replacing warmth. Rose mentioned the shouting matches. Your son's teacher said you snapped at her when you asked about your novel. Rose mentioned the shouting matches. Your son's teacher said you snapped at her when you asked... Take 3, God damn it. Rose mentioned the shouting matches. Your son's teacher said you snapped at her when she asked about your novel. The monitor beside the bed quickened its rhythm. Beep, 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 beep. The fluorescent lights seemed suddenly too bright, the room simultaneously expanding and contracting. Michael's fingertips tingled, then his palms, then his wrists. The sensation crawled up his arms as his chest heaved. He could feel each individual vein throbbing beneath his skin, could track the pulse as it hammered through his temples, down his neck, into his feet. Michael tried to concentrate, but the mass in his throat demanded attention, shifting with each swallow. He coughed again, harder this time, the pain making his eyes water. Nothing dislodged. The IV needle shifted in his arm as he tried to sit up. The room tilted, spun, then righted itself. Michael watched his own hand reach for the bed rail as if the limb belonged to someone else entirely. Gort. The words scraped against raw tissue. Michael swallowed, tasting copper and something else. Something fleshy caught between his teeth. He ran his tongue along the roof of his mouth, feeling those strange strings lodged in his throat. His jaw worked painfully as he forced his swollen tongue to shape the syllables. Gordon? He clutched at the thin hospital sheet, knuckles white, eyes wild, breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The question hung in the sterile air between them. Devon glanced at the monitors indicating his rising stats. He returned his gaze to Michael. You're sure you don't remember anything? What's the last thing you remember, Michael? He asked. Michael tried to answer, but instead began to cough, a wheezing, strained sound. Remember holding the door. Something was holding the door, he finally managed. The effort sent another wave of pain through his skull. He pawed at his throat, trying to soothe the growing discomfort. Devon frowned. What do you mean by something? He asked, concern now growing plainly on his face. Michael couldn't focus on that question. Something was lodged deep in his throat, something that shouldn't be there. He coughed again, harder, each spasm sending lightning bolts of pain through his head. Michael, I'm going to need you to work with me here. There are concerns, Devon began, his voice sounding distant through Michael's growing distress. Michael suddenly realized he was strapped into the bed. He tugged futilely at the restraints, panic rising as the obstruction in his throat seemed to grow. He needed to get it out. His chest heaved with the effort to breathe around whatever was blocking his airway. When they brought you here, you were raving. You were lashing out. You cut a nurse above the eye. Thank God it didn't affect her vision, but if you had... Michael, something is very wrong, but I'm here to help you. Something has been going on this week, and I want to get to the bottom of it with you. But until I start to understand what prompted this recent behavior, we're not going to be able to justify you returning home, Devon said. Michael barely heard him. His tongue darted across his lips. Fragments of memory surfaced. The nursery door, resistance against his shoulder, silence where there should have been screaming. But the mounting pressure in his throat consumed his attention. The thing holding the door, he gasped, between increasingly desperate coughs. I had seen this darkness. It was somebody standing in Gordon's room. There was somebody in Gordon's room. Where's Gordon? The words scraped his raw throat, each syllable agony. Gordon is going to be okay, Ed Devon offered, but his tone was doubtful. What's wrong? Why are you saying it like that? Going to be okay. What happened? Michael said, his voice rising despite the pain. This caught the attention of a nearby nurse. Devon noticed her heading over to the nurse's station. We don't have much time, so I need you to listen to me, Michael, Devon said, lowering his voice. I understand you've seen something, but your wife has some serious concerns about what exactly you could have had happen to you, to act in the way you were. Why? What did she see? Michael asked, gagging between words. A nurse and an orderly were making their way over to Michael's bed. You honestly don't remember? Devon asked. No, stop asking me that and tell me what the hell happened. All I remember was someone in Gordon's room. What was I doing? Michael was screaming now, the effort triggering a violent coughing fit. The nurse and orderly were almost on him now. He lurched forward against the restraints, his body convulsing. Devon reached out instinctively, his hand supporting Michael's shoulder. Michael hacked and coughed, his free hand flying to his mouth. Something wet and solid finally dislodged, filling his palm with warm wetness. When he pulled his hand away, his fingers were spattered with blood and saliva. In the center of his palm lay a small tangle of dark hair attached to a ragged piece of scalp, glistening crimson under the harsh hospital lights. A few strands clung to his lips. Michael stared at the horror in his hand, then at Devon, who watched him with a mixture of revulsion and pity. You were cutting parts of your scalp off, Michael, Devon said, his voice barely audible over the sudden rushing in Michael's ears. And from the sounds of it, you'd offered some pieces to your son. The next thing Michael felt was the bite of the needle in his shoulder, and abyssal sleep took him. Okay. Bloody hell. That was the end of chapter 4. I've still got another, yeah, I've still got a lot more. I'm forgetting how many chapters I got ahead of me. Yeah, so this was the first part of the recording of the audiobook. As you can tell, one really hadn't nailed the accent I was going to use for Devon. Thank you to you, Eric. Appreciate you. Boston, Kaylee, NJ, everyone that's on here, much appreciated. I'm gonna do the next part soon. I'm probably gonna have to redo so much. There's so many like things I hadn't counted on, and this was such a like learning experience. There's about a bajillion things that I had never even factored in. Like, you don't even know what you don't know. You go to like go live on YouTube and it's like, yeah, I just want to stream, like just take video, and then it's like, cool. So you need to set up like a streaming service, and I'm like, what does that mean? Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna have to re-record parts, I'm sure, but I'll probably do that. If people are interested, they can, let out. I'm actually, this is a good question. Are you using audiobook specific software? I'm actually using Descript. So I've been led to understand that Descript is a perfectly serviceable option for audiobooks. I think that I'm going to see how it goes. I'm going to take this first part and see whether the fidelity is good enough. First time recording it, I'm completely aware that, and I fully accept that, like, it's entirely possible that like everything that I just did today might be a complete wash. So, this might be just for posterity of YouTube recording. But anyway, I'm thinking that I've been told and I've been led to understand that Descript is a really good, perfectly serviceable option. Yeah, like the number one feature. So the thing is I'm like marking the timestamp by just doing a quick highlight of where in it. I'm sure that there's like not a good way to do it. I wanted to have like a clicker so that you can have like a really quick like peek so you can go back to it, but Descript works off of it's a transcript based software. Anyway, I have a hard stop in like a minute, so I'm going to run to this next call, but I cannot thank you guys enough for being here for this part of it and watching me thrash about like a newborn at this very new thing. I'm going to go away now. I'm gonna make this shirt live in our store. It's got all sorts of spooky shit on it, like you know, it's very good quality, etc. And I designed it. Um, if you're a person who is heavy set like me, you can look forward to having it be like all sit weird on your front. But if you're a person with like a good, nice flat body type, you'll be very interested to check it out more. I'm kidding, obviously, but anyway. Thanks so much, and love you guys. We'll till the next one. Peace.